On this Tuesday night, disaster from torrential rain in the northeastern U.S.
This is nowhere near over.
The fears of what's next for Vermont. While parts of Canada desperately need rain, what people are being urged to do. Ukraine's fight to join NATO, the reluctance to set a timeline, what President Zelensky calls absurd, and the help the alliance will provide in the meantime. The opioid emergency, cutting Indigenous lives short.
How do we do something or people will continue to die?
Why governments can't agree on how to help. And the tiny Canadian lake telling the story of how humans have profoundly altered planet Earth.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
More than 11 million Americans are still under flood watches today after a summer's worth of rain fell in parts of the northeastern U.S. The American President Joe Biden calls the flooding catastrophic and has declared a state of emergency in Vermont. The hardest hit areas of that state have been drenched with more than 230 millimeters of rain in 2 days. And that's led to more than 100 rescues as raging floodwaters shut down roads and trap people in their homes. Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is a small break in the rain tonight, but more extreme weather is on the way, and the ground is already saturated. Some dams in Vermont are reaching capacity, and people are being told they should be ready to head to higher ground at a moment's notice. Jackson Proskow has our top story tonight.
Look at that, there goes the couch.
Though the rain may have stopped, the water is unrelenting. A raging torrent sweeping across parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, and New York.
Bridges washed out, and there's this, like a 6-foot sinkhole that absorbed the road, and there's a pickup truck floating down there.
2 days of heavy storms delivered 2 months of rain, redrawing the landscape, leaving communities cut off and isolated.
The river had actually jumped its bank and went around a few of the houses, pinching them off from the road.
Vermont's capital, Montpelier, remains under threat after receiving an all-time record amount of rain Monday. A nearby dam is nearing capacity and could send even more water downstream if it overflows.
People will think this is over, but it's not over because the rivers could still rise. The water has to go someplace. The reservoirs are filling up.
Rescuers are going door to door looking for people still in harm's way. So far, they've plucked dozens to safety.
We still have reports of people trapped in flooded homes and vehicles.
Vermont has long been identified as a potential climate refuge, a place supposedly at lower risk from the worst impacts of global warming. This 1 in 1,000-year storm shows nowhere is safe.
This is based on past climate data, not the present and definitely not the future climate. So what is a 1,000-year storm, quote unquote, will become more likely 100 or worse than that.
With more rain forecast this week, residents have little time to assess the damage.
We are not out of the woods. This is nowhere near over.
A far-reaching disaster that may deliver more misery in the days ahead. Jackson Proskow, Global News.
In parts of Canada, it's not rain, but heat and dry weather fueling an environmental catastrophe. According to the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre, more than 860 active fires are raging across the country now. Over 500 of them are out of control. This year, more than 9.5 million hectares of land has burned, far surpassing any other year, and it's only early July. More than 300 of the fires are burning in BC, dozens sparked in the last 24 hours. As Neetu Garcha reports, on top of the evacuations and the alerts, people are being told to conserve water.
I think we escaped something that could have been quite horrific.
There is finally some relief near Smithers after wildfire came dangerously close to the town in northwestern British Columbia.
I've never been that close to a wildfire. I feel a high level of annoyance if I see sprinklers watering driveways or sending water out onto the road.
Provincial officials say restrictions on water usage are likely on the way, with half of BC's 34 water basins at a level 4 of 5 on the drought classification system, as they urge everyone to conserve water by taking shorter showers, not watering plants during the hottest times of day, and limiting dishwasher and washing machine use.
We are anticipating continued extreme fire behavior, and all of us need to do our part to prevent the situation from becoming any worse, no matter where we are in the province.
A province-wide campfire ban excluding the island of Haida Gwaii is also in effect. The BC Wildfire Service is appealing for more out-of-province help.
So that we can give our BC crews the appropriate rest and reset so that they're ready to action fires later into the season.
Even with all the resources, until we get actual good precipitation for a long period of time, that's what's really going to make a big difference.
The Bulkley-Nechako Regional District is also hoping for rain.
I've lived in this same community, same farm for all of my life, and I haven't seen it this dry at this time of year ever, since I've lived here.
BC's widespread drought conditions also caused the tinder dry conditions contributing to a record wildfire season, which has already seen more than 1 million hectares burned.
We owe it to one another to be very careful.
Officials at all levels of government are reminding everyone of the power of their individual actions to prevent the situation from getting even worse. Neetu Garcha, Global News.
A little later, we'll tell you about how a tiny Ontario lake holds evidence of humanity's impact on Earth and marks a possible new chapter in the planet's history. But first, NATO leaders are in Lithuania for a key summit that could change the course of Russia's war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his wife are there, arriving for dinner tonight, along with other world leaders. He is frustrated with NATO, though, and its decision to grant membership to Ukraine only when it says conditions are met. Despite Ukraine's demands, no clear timetable has been set for the country to enter NATO. David Aiken is traveling with Canada's Prime Minister and reports on the conditions and what help lies ahead.
Volodymyr Zelensky.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was greeted like a rock star at a rally in the Lithuanian capital of Vilnius.
Ukraina и Словия Литвой.
A few kilometers away, inside the NATO summit, leaders, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, are ready to greet Zelensky as a friend, but they are cautious about welcoming his country right now as a full NATO ally.
We agree with the open door policy of NATO, and we are in favor of Ukraine joining NATO when conditions allow.
NATO allies have different views on what conditions they are looking for that would trigger Ukraine's accession to NATO. The most common precondition, an end to the war in Ukraine, however that might happen. But other allies have concerns about the interoperability of Ukraine's military with NATO militaries, and still others are concerned about the kinds of corruption that existed in Ukraine before the war. Still, NATO leaders did agree to a package of 3 elements to support Ukraine now. First, a multi-year assistance plan for Ukraine, which includes support for reconstruction. Second, a new NATO-Ukraine Council, where both sides will meet as equals to discuss the war and any future crisis.
Third, we reaffirmed that Ukraine will become a member of NATO and agreed to remove the requirement for a membership action plan.
Removing that action plan requirement will speed up Ukraine's eventual access to NATO, but again, only when conditions are right.
This is a strong package for Ukraine and a clear path towards its membership in NATO.
This NATO summit is also meant to be a show of Western unity against Russia. But there are some divisions here. Divisions over Ukraine's candidacy, for example, or defense spending. And also some opposition to the United States' decision to supply Ukraine with controversial cluster munitions. But Canada's foreign minister says the overarching message is the alliance will not waver.
When Putin invaded Ukraine, he thought he would divide us. But the reality is, we are more united than ever.
Zelensky said it was, quote, absurd that Ukraine was not offered a clear time frame for membership. Zelensky will get a chance to express his frustration tomorrow when he takes part in a session with all NATO leaders. He is also expected to have one-on-one meetings with U.S. President Joe Biden and with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Donna.
All right, David Aiken in Vilnius, Lithuania. Thanks. All 6 people on board a helicopter are dead after it crashed near Mount Everest. The helicopter, flown by a Nepalese pilot and carrying 5 Mexican tourists, was on its way back from viewing the world's highest peak. Nepal's Civil Aviation Authority says the helicopter lost contact with the ground about 8 minutes after takeoff. It is monsoon season in Nepal, and bad weather may have led the pilot to change the flight path. All 6 bodies have been recovered, and an investigation is underway. The Indigenous community pleads for help. Coming up, why life expectancy is now dramatically shorter for Indigenous Albertans. Indigenous communities in Alberta are sounding an alarm. The opioid crisis that has claimed so many lives across the country has significantly lowered life expectancy. According to Alberta Health Services, the average life expectancy for a First Nations person in 2017 was 71 years. By 2020, that number had dropped to just under 67. 1 year later, in 2021, it dropped even further to just over 63 years. By comparison, life expectancy for a non-Indigenous person is 81. Heather Yourex-West explains why this happened and what needs to change.
Today, Buck Breaker is a well-respected leader on the Siksika First Nation, but it wasn't always that way.
I've been homeless. I've lost families, jobs, been in jail, and all because of addiction.
A traumatic childhood led Breaker down a path of addiction. He's now been sober 11 years, but all around him, drugs continue to claim lives.
I think 2020, as a nation, I remember we lost about 92 people.
So 92 deaths in 1 year, that's out of a population of how many?
8,000.
We know that over the years, the substances have become more toxic.
Across Alberta, the opioid crisis has become so bad, the Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations declared a state of emergency, asking all levels of government for immediate support. But on this file, the provincial and federal governments don't see eye to eye. The Alberta government has signed 4 deals with First Nations communities to build treatment facilities on their lands. The Premier accusing Ottawa of falling behind on its own responsibility to provide Indigenous care.
Which is why we're working in direct partnership with First Nations to address it.
In response, Ottawa says Alberta is playing politics, pushing a solution with no mention of harm reduction or safe supply.
For almost 20 years, I've been saying you cannot help people. There's no recovery. There's no treatment model for people who are dead.
Still, the promise of a new treatment facility in Siksika brings Breaker hope.
Either we do something or people will continue to die.
Because right now, across the province, 2 to 3 Albertans are dying from drug poisoning every single day. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
The Assembly of First Nations has a new interim chief. Joanna Bernard was sworn in today at the AFN General Assembly after the organization removed former national chief Roseanne Archibald nearly 2 weeks ago.
We know the decision that was not taken lightly and was a result of careful consideration by the leadership and representatives of our nations.
Archibald, who was elected in 2021, was voted out after an investigation into workplace harassment complaints. Not all chiefs were present for that vote. Archibald says she was targeted for fighting corruption and demanding a financial audit, and accuses the organization of silencing those who are questioning her removal. Today, Archibald attended the Assembly virtually as a proxy for another chief, and she was later removed from the meeting after 2 turns at the microphone. Allegations of forced labor ahead. 2 Canadian companies under investigation for their operations in China. A gold mining corporation and the Canadian branch of Nike are being investigated for possible forced labor being used in their supply chains.
These are very serious issues that have been brought to our attention. And so it warrants the investigation to identify the veracity of those and to what extent.
Ottawa's corporate ethics czar announced the first of 2 investigations relating to China's Uyghur minority. Sherry Meyerhofer says that Dynasty Gold, a gold mining company, has argued it does not have control over the mine where the alleged abuse is taking place. And she also says Nike Canada claims it no longer has connections with the suppliers in question. There's no clear timeline when the final report will be released. A suspect has been charged in connection with a stabbing on the Toronto subway. 25-year-old Moses Lewin appeared in court today on several charges, including attempted murder and aggravated assault. Witnesses say 2 men got into an altercation on the train last Thursday. The victim was taken to hospital and is expected to survive. Lewin will remain in custody until his next court appearance. And work is underway in Toronto to fix a problem that is tainting a brand new attraction. Less than 3 weeks after the city opened Love Park, its centerpiece, a heart-shaped pond, has turned green. The city is blaming a mechanical issue. It says it's working to try to address the issue. Love Park officially opened on June 23rd in Toronto's harbourfront. Evidence unearthed next, the big discovery deep beneath this small Canadian lake. Take a look at this volcano in Iceland erupting just 30 kilometers from the capital, Reykjavik. Monday afternoon, there was intense earthquake activity in the area, causing a 200-meter-long fissure and bursts of lava. There's no imminent danger, though, and no disruption to flights, but people are being told to stay away because of potentially noxious gases. It's the 3rd such eruption in Iceland's southwest peninsula in 3 years. You've probably never heard of this small, very deep Canadian lake, but the news about it is big. It's called Crawford Lake, and buried in the sediment beneath it is geochemical evidence of a new potential chapter in the Earth's 4.6 billion year history, the clearest and most pronounced evidence of humankind's influence on the planet. Nestled in a secluded spot just about an hour's drive west of Toronto, Crawford Lake is at the center of a monumental declaration about a new chapter in geologic time, the Anthropocene epoch. Today, after 15 years of study, a panel of scientists has declared Crawford Lake is the best place on Earth to mark the start of the age of humans. Jeff Semple on what the little lake reveals and why it matters.
Just 10 minutes from Canada's busiest highway sits this serene lake, which holds the secrets of human history.
It's an incredible sight.
Tim Patterson and his team of geologists have spent years studying Crawford Lake. Created 13,000 years ago by a collapsed cave, the little lake is incredibly deep, reaching down 24 meters. The bottom is so well protected that it's become like a time capsule, absorbing thousands of years of history. When the geologists retrieved samples of sediment from the lake floor, they found its layers were like the rings of a tree, each line offering clues to its age. These layers, for example, formed during a terrible drought in 1935. But by around 1950, the chemistry of the lake began to change.
When essentially there was enormous economic development as the world recovered from World War II.
Radioactive plutonium was found in the mud, thought to be from nuclear weapons tests thousands of kilometers away. The sediment showed effects from acid rain and fossil fuels, and some microbe species began to disappear.
And now we've changed the character of the system so much that we're actually leaving a geologic record of human activity.
Crawford Lake is unique. No other body of water on Earth is known to contain this combination of attributes. And this little lake has now caught the world's attention.
The Anthropocene thesis.
This international panel of scientists announced Crawford Lake had been chosen to mark the start of a new chapter in Earth's history, known as the Anthropocene, or the age of humans.
Human beings as a species are becoming the greatest force of nature.
This renowned Canadian photographer produced a documentary on the Anthropocene, the world-altering event that some scientists consider comparable to the extinction of the dinosaurs.
And today we're having a slower motion extinction event, but we are now the equivalent of a meteor impact.
Scientists are still debating whether Anthropocene should be considered an official epoch, and samples from Crawford Lake will be used as evidence.
It is the first step towards the potential ratification of Anthropocene as a geological epoch.
And Crawford Lake also offers hope. In recent decades, as the world reduced nuclear weapons testing, acid rain, and coal-powered production, something incredible happened. The lake began to heal. Jeff Semple, Global News, Milton, Ontario.
Declaring a new chapter in geologic time is not done lightly. Here's a little bit of background. Geological epochs are long periods of time, typically around 2 million years, separated by major changes to the planet, such as the massive exploding meteor that ended the late Cretaceous period and wiped out the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Since then, kind of like a calendar, scientists have classified 7 geologic epochs on Earth, the most recent being the Holocene, which started at the end of the last ice age, 11,700 years ago. The Anthropocene, anthropo meaning human, would be the latest. About 20 years ago, a Nobel Prize-winning chemist, Paul Crutzen, popularized the idea that science should recognize the huge impact that humans have on Earth, from species extinction to biodiversity loss and climate change, and search for the so-called golden spike of evidence of this new epoch. 12 sites were identified, studied, and debated, and now Little Crawford Lake in Ontario has been chosen as the golden spike, the ideal marker showing where one epoch ends and another begins. That is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada, something a little different, some new additions at the Calgary Zoo. Red panda parents Udaya and Linus had their second litter of cubs, twins. The zoo's nursery camera shows the mother bonding with her babies. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.